Begin the technical session 5. The first presenter, Ajisha, is there, I hope. Ajisha, Ajisha is on the line.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you so much. So, shall I begin my presentation?
So, let me introduce you. So, Ajisha is a student from MA English from KMM College of Arts and Science. And the title is Shantaram and the Multicultural City, a study of Gregory David Roberts Shantaram. Now you may begin.
So, thank you so much for your welcome, and I immensely thank each and everyone for this opportunity. So, my title of my paper is Shantaram and the Multicultural City, a study of Gregory David Roberts Shantaram. So first talking about the author, he is an Australian author best known for his this particular novel Shantaram. So he's a former heroin addict and convicted bank robber who escaped from the prison, and he fled to India where he lived for 10 years. So he was extradited to Australia and he served 6 years in prison. So during his stay in Australian prison, he began writing this particular novel Shantaram, and the manuscript, which was destroyed by prison wardens twice while he was writing this particular novel. So, after leaving the prison, Roberts was able to finally finish and publish his novel. And the book's name comes from the name his best friend's mother gave him, which means man of peace or man of God's peace. So this is where the title comes from. So, talking about the story, it follows 100 man's search for love, for truth, and the reality set in the midst of the underworld of contemporary Bombay. So, he begins his journey by meeting Prabhakar, a quintessential Bombay tour guide who impacts Lynn the most in this mesmerizing novel. So, the two of them together they pay a visit to a small village in Maharashtra where Lynn, the protagonist, he falls in love with India and earns the name Shantaram. So he followed his return. Lynn forfeits the life he made in Bombay, circling leopards, and moves into the slums where he establishes a free health clinic and also joins the mafia. And he worked there as a money launderer. So he finds his family in the slums. He finds very much attached in the slums and a father figure in mafia king Khadagan. So, this particular novel is a study of multiculturalism. So, he chooses to live in India and in Bombay, which itself is a microcosm of the multicultural India. So, even though he's a foreigner, he does not face any kind of cultural identity in Bombay. He learns to adjust with the culture of slum dwellers, and the slum dwellers are also able to adjust with the same culture of him. So he meets different foreigners and the local people, but even though he's in the confusion, but he does not face a problem in interacting with them. He behaves like a native and he acquires the native culture. So his acquisition of the Marathi and also the Hindi language, his life in slum even as a foreigner, his visit to standing babas, his interest in the songs, that all described in this beautiful novel. So it clearly gives a picture of the various places and the streets of Mumbai city, and it describes the changes that's happened in the city. And the beginning of the novel showcases the city as a non-Mumbaiker as it pursues it, and it's a motley of culture, language, custom, religion, and countries. So, as we all know, like culture is derived from the Latin word color, and it is all the knowledge and values that shared by the society can be termed under culture. So, culturalism describes a main position on relations between culture and society, and this perspective informed the work of Richard Hoggart and the earlier writings of Raymond Williams also. And then the post colonial era is one of the displacement and the migration of multiculturalism and multilingualism of split subjects and divided loyalties. So, the culturalism, talking about the term multiculturalism, it gathers a number of interrelated themes. It underscores the need to have a stable identity. It emphasizes the contribution of cultural communities to the fulfillment of this need, and it brings out the link between identity and recognition. And then, in a globalized world, it is perhaps time to think in terms of comparative multicultural studies. And there are different forms of multiculturalism, such as conservative multiculturalism, liberal multiculturalism, left liberal multiculturalism, and resistance multiculturalism. And then talking about Bombay, now it's known as Mumbai, is a home to around 10 million people, and it is a thriving cosmopolitan multicultural city, and it is the center of India's entertainment industry. So people in Bombay are becoming more and more diverse as a people. So this diversity it continuously evolves as a changing world situation, and it brings new communities to the city. So with these advent various cultures, some diverse religion and customs, some people from other parts of the world take part in this, particularly through the cultural festivals. So Bombay cities are cultural enclaves, the groups of suburbs where a lot of people from particular culture lives. So in Mumbai, you can see a lot of cultures, a lot of languages there. So the city Shantaram enters is truly multicultural. So there are people with various cultural background, and it is evident from the description of our author Robert that the city Lynn entered as a multicultural city. So he says that then there were people, there were Assamese, there were Punjabis, Rajasthan, Bengal. So there are many people from many different places, from Cochin, from warrior city, Brahmin, and various caste also. So they are very different phase and form that the extravagant variety, the incomparable comparable beauty, and the restaurants and the hotels where the protagonist and the Prabhagar entered world were multicultural. He says that though there were Africans, Arabs, Europeans, and Indians, and also the languages and the music that changed in every air. So Shantaram, he accepts Mumbai as his own city, and he says that millions of dreams were born there around every day. So millions of dreams died there and were born again. So he's thrust into the proximity with some of the most objectionable aspects of life in Bombay. So first, the mob that brutalizes the obnoxious cabbie strikes in Lynn as wrong, and then he comes face to face with a slave market. So these unsettling moments of intercultural contact seem to contrast with or the abstract truth is that, so if there is a standard of right and wrong, how can Len accept practices that seem blatantly to violate his sense of morality, mob, and violence? So the mixing of different cultures in the various names of the protagonist himself. And then the Bombay city, it is pictured in the novel is truly multicultural, and it has the characteristics of a multicultural city. The city culture is largely hybrid, and the people in the city are products of a mixed culture. You can see so many people there. So it centers the lives of people belonging to different cultural backgrounds, and he deals with the theme of assimilation and adaptation. So migrants interview and the cultural discourse of the dominant culture through their interaction with the host culture. So it is purely a product of a multicultural, multi-layered, and a multifaceted society. So he does not have the consciousness of self-culture or the other culture. He accepts any culture as his own culture, and he accepts the people as his own people, even from the slums, and serves them as it is his duty to serve them. He does not feel a sense of cultural inferiority or a kind of cultural superiority. He enjoys an equal position with the natives and the other foreigners. So it is closely associated with identity politics and the politics of difference. So even though the culture of Shantaram is different from that of the culture of the people in Bombay, he recognizes himself as part of the Bombay culture. And he's a stranger to the reader in every part of the novel, and he's a man who belongs to the very strange cultural background. And as the novel progresses, you can feel him as a man who has the same culture of us. We do not feel an estrangement to him. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this is about my presentation.
Thank you, Ajisha. That is a wonderful presentation. And you have brought out all the impacts of the multiculturalism and how it has been affected the Mumbai city, and the outcome of the multiculturalism and everything in a wonderful way. Thank you for your presentation. We will move on to the next presenter. The next presenter is Mustafa from Kerala, and his title is Modernity and Globalization as a Cultural Turn in the Postmodern World with reference to Arjun Apathurai. May I have the presenter to take over the session?
Hello,
Yes, you're audible.
hello, I'm audible.
Yeah,
Okay, let me start my presentation. My
your
paper
sound is
name.
actually not clear.
Hello.
Yeah, a little more louder.
Oh, okay, fine.
Okay.
Okay, my paper is Modernity at Large, a cultural dimension of globalization. It is the book of Arjun Appadure. When it comes to the writer, Arjun Appadure is a prominent contemporary social cultural anthropologist, having formerly served as a provost and senior vice president for academic affairs at the new schools in NYC. He has held various professional chairs and visiting appointments at some of top institutions in the United States and Europe. And in this book, he talks about the globalization and its consequence, like modernity, and he termed as scapes from cultural scapes and ethnoscapes, modern scapes, and later it's curtailed to five scapes. This is the essence of the book he talks about, and I'm presenting here the short of my abstract and the paper. Nowadays, it is perfectly acceptable to state that we all live in we all live in a global village. The world is shrinking and the world is growing smaller. Economists, sociologists, and anthropologists all realize that globalization has dramatically changed the world. However, they do not agree on the cause and consequence of these changes, in particular, what is new about globalization. World historians especially are aware of the fact that the shrinking of the world started as early as 1492 or 1498. Indeed, mass migration, cross-cultural trade, warfare, and colonization have economically, culturally, and politically been changing the shape of world history over the past 5 centuries already. In modernity at large, the cultural theorist Abdul Apadure has taken up the challenge and has attempted to show what is new about globalization. In the last 2 decades or so, his main aim is to focus on the cultural dimensions of globalization. He explores how the interconnectedness of migration and modern mass media affects the imagination and defines notions of neighborhood, nation, and nationhood. In his view, it has only been in the past 2 decades that the media and migration have begun to deteriorate, which has led to the emergence of long-distance nationalism, diasporic public sphere, ethnic violence, and the growing distinction of various economic, cultural, and political aspects of daily life. Here, here we arrive at the heart of Apadure's theory. Apadure became famous in the early 1990s for his neologism, the use of the suffix "scape", which we when combined with the appropriate suffix ethno, media, techno, finance, and ideo. These are all the five scapes we discuss about in this book. Offers a radical new framework for examining cultural dimensions of globalization over the last 2 decades. Central to Apothere's theory is that new global culture economy cannot longer be understood in terms of existing center-periphery models. These various scapes suggest an alternative spatial rendering of the represent, one that is not fixed as a typical landscape might be, but amorphous and flowing in various directions and with various sizes. These scapes are the building blocks of the contemporary imagined world. Modernity at large is thus seen as an extension and a repetition of Abadue's earlier essays. His appealing rhetoric made him very popular among postmodernists. Despite their rhetorical brilliance, however, the, these essays have their limitation. Why, for example, does Apadure's distinct only five scapes where I could think of many more, such as science and environment. Furthermore, what is the relation between the different scapes? Is there any is there any relation, and if so, how does it work? If the main aim of these essays is to offer a new framework for the cultural study of globalization, what then so cultural about finance case? In his first chapter, Here and Now, Apadure makes a great fuss over the difference between culture, cultural, and culturalism. But as far as I can see, he does not use his own analytical framework in any of his other chapters. Apadura is simultaneously explores and exports boundaries between how we imagine the world and how that imagination influences our self-understanding, between social institutions and their effects on the people who participate in them, between nations and the peoples that seem to be ever more homogeneous and yet ever more filled with the differences. Modernity at large offers a path to move beyond traditional opposition between cultural and power, tradition and modernity, global and local, pointing out the vital role imagination plays in our construction of the world of today and tomorrow. Offering a new framework for the cultural study of globalization, modernity at large shows how the imagination works as a social force in today's world, providing new resources for identity and energies for creating alternatives to the nation state, whose era some sees as coming to an end. Apadure examines the current epoch of globalization, which is characterized by the twin forces of mass migration and electronic mediation, and provides fresh ways of looking at popular consumption patterns and culture. He considered the way images of lifestyle, popular culture, and self-representation circulate internationally through the media and are often borrowed in surprising to their origination in which they inventive fashion. A, ma- a major work while many people are currently writing about global culture in the transactional world. Virtually none of them have Apadure's grounding in the anthropological literature and worldview or his global perspective. More of these essays refer to another main theme in the book related to scapes, the fact that modern media and mass migration have supply and together produced an increasing degrees of instability in the creation of selves and identities. The near universal access to mass media images has democratized and extended the imagination of ordinary and often illiterate people around the world. So I am with my done with my presentation. Hello.
Yes, sir. That was a good presentation. You have brought out the cultural impact of globalization and modernity in the modern world. So that was a good presentation and a good message given. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
The next presenter, Prasita Lakshmi from Catholic College, Kerala. The title is Analysis the Oppression in Religious Culture based on the movie The Great Indian Kitchen. May I have the presenter?
Yes, ma'am.
The session is open for you.
Okay, ma'am. I am Prasida Lakshmi S. from Catholic College. Let's begin the dissertation. The analysis the oppression in religious culture based on the movie The Great Indian Kitchen. As we all know, religious as a cultural system composed of myths, rituals, symbols, and beliefs. The main reasons for unity in society include culture. This culture express how human experience and understand the world, and religion has historically influenced Indian society on a political, cultural, economical level. The movie Great Indian Kitchen, directed by Geo Baby, shows the fundamental ways in which humans experience the cultural behavior and oppressed society, which reflect the influence of religious culture. The cultural society is unity and diversity. Sometimes religious culture make people untouchable. Here, the dissertation deals with the history and main aspects of religious culture. Then analyze the oppression in society through the movie The Great Indian Kitchen and how accurate the portrayal the society. Then shows the discrimination that still lives in the society. How the culture that people cherish make toxic. Finally, discuss about the reasons why the oppression occurred through the religious culture and highlight the collection of cultural systems and beliefs. It considered that socio-cultural systems are the building blocks of society. They are structure for where humans share experience, culture, which can be learned from used to the advantage in order to better their society. Some of the major systems that are leading society are religious, education, politics, and law. Religious culture was viewed as a belief in old society and is lightly visible. Religious practices and beliefs are a therapy towards humankind's looping with problems of daily life. Religious and other belief systems in our environment have an influence on our identity regardless of whether it consider ourselves religious or spiritual. As social structure, they provide a supportive network and a sense of belonging. It is the time that religions have been around since the start of a human history, and it has caused a good number of problems throughout the history. Oppression in religious culture is main problem that still exists. When it can be analyzed through the movie The Great Indian Kitchen, the main story is about a woman's post-marriage life. A woman tries to fit into conventional mold that society has prescribed for married women. But somewhere along the way, she starts feeling that this is not what she wants. In the story, main aspects produce the marital problem, but it have also shows the religious culture that we follow, how it badly affect the woman. Religious is followed for our benefits, but when it comes obsessive towards society, it compels people to do wrongs. The movie portrays the woman when she gets her period. She is appealed to discover that the family's beliefs regarding menstruation are extremely regressive. She is asked to hold herself up all above in the floor in a room. She was not allowed to use bathrooms, instead bath in the river, eat separately and wash all things she touches, and to sleep outside during those days. The system is still following in our country. In the old days, temples are located in the forest, so smell of the blood draws attention towards the animals. This make a woman to stay during the days. But nowadays, everything changed except the system of oppression. The women have to stay in a room, not allowed to so outside. Here, every right are prohibited from her. As Margaret Archer, in a revised editor of her classical work Cultural and Agency, argues that the grand idea of a unified, integrated culture system as a myth. Here, the myth of menstrual bed is and that is shown here. The religion is become a over cultural system. It shows the upper hand authority towards minority. They forced to follow people who were oppressed to show respect towards cultural system. Karl Marx described about critical of the Hegelian philosophy of right in 1844 that religious is the opium of the people. Says that religious that is obvious here that social inequality is being naturalized, that is literally disguised as nature and viewed as a situation that is God given and inseparable when actually it is the product of a specific politics and power structure. The assumption is that any innovation of nature will have that side effect of disguising politics and legitimate inequality and injustice. When religious cultures start by the people to maintain the beliefs power over them, the society united to believe it as well. But when the power is controlled by privileged people, it became institution of two divisions. When it comes to being committed to challenging power relations of privilege and subordination in development studies and practical nature and impact of inequality along the lines of gender, ethnicity, and race. But when it comes to inequality on account of religion, there are either merely given passing acknowledgement presented as a byproduct of their inequality or sometimes ignored altogether. David T. Smith, in Religious Persecution and Political Order in United States, defines religious presentation as a violence or discrimination against religious minority because of the religious affiliation, referring to action that are intended to deprive individual of their political rights and to force to live as second class citizen. It may be defined as violation of freedom of thoughts, consciousness, and beliefs which are spread in accordance with a systematic and active state policy which encourage actions such as punishment given. Finally, to solve the oppression in society, make society inclusive by challenging relations of exclusion and marginalizing imperative and allowing for appropriate presentation can go a long way of establishing right. Education through choose the religion has become old enough to have inclusive society where communities enjoy freedoms and rights, but are uh, and to have societies that respect a religious communities' right and withhold individual rights. That's all for my dissertation. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasita
Hello.
Lakshmi.
Okay. Okay,
That
ma'am.
was really an effective presentation. You have brought out the drawbacks and oppressions of religious culture, especially in a feminist perspective, too. And your choice of taking a film for analysis is good. And thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Next, we move on to the next presenter. I invite Desma Joy from Holy Cross College. She's presenting on the title Cultural Impact on Women, a Feministic Study of Virginia Woolf's The New Dress. Desma Joy?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Let me
the
present
session
my
is
screen.
the session is open for you.
Ma'am, is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, ma'am. Good evening to everyone present here. Myself is Bisma Joy, and I'm currently pursuing my second year of PG in English Literature at Holy Cross College, Nagarkoil. And the title of my paper is Cultural Impact on Women, a Feministic Study of Virginia Woolf's The New Dress. So, culture is a marvelous miracle which binds people together from all over the world. And each and every country has a distinct culture which highlights the customs and traditions followed in that specific nation. People around the globe get fascinated by these unique cultures of various nations. But women struggle a lot than men under these cultural structures. They are expected to maintain a perfect etiquette to be accepted as an individual in the society, which follows a standard culture. And the work that I have chosen for this presentation is Virginia Woolf's The New Dress. And let me give a brief intro about the author and her work. Virginia Woolf is a celebrated English writer whose works mostly sheds light on the plight of women. Her magnificent short story, The New Dress, it's taken from the collection A Haunted House and Other Stories, and it is also published in the collection Mrs. Dalloway's Party. So this short story, it gives a clear-cut picture on the mental trauma faced by women in a high-class society. And the aim of this paper is to bring out the effects of culture on women, which highly questions a woman's identity in the cultural bound world through the short story The New Dress by Virginia Woolf. So people from all over the universe, they follow a different culture, and the cultural impact, it commences right after the birth of a child. An individual, he or she is expected to follow the cultural norms of a nation, and they are given the liberty to follow any culture, but this does not fit everywhere, because in India, if a person comes to India, he or she must follow the cultures and customs of India, and not uh, the cultures of any other nation. And society is also a part of culture. It is a dynamic institution which leads to traditions, customs, class, and creed. So, high class society, it is considered as one of the highest ladders, which is nearly impossible to climb. Like people are still striving, I mean, the middle class people, they are still striving to climb this ladder. And women suffer a lot than men due to this aftermath of cultural impacts. This takes place when a woman tries to adjust herself within the society which does not suit her social standards. And the aftermaths of cultural impacts include low self esteem, alienation, insecurity, comparative nature, distrust, and conflict between classes. And let me give a brief plot about the short story, The New Dress. And the story revolves around the protagonist, May Palwaring, and she is invited to a high class party which was hosted by Clarissa Dalloway. And Maple is overwhelmed by the invitation, and she progresses to the new step, which is to choose an elegant dress for the party. And she was also so excited about the party, and she even chooses the pattern for her dress from a Paris fashion book with the help of Miss Millen. And Maple becomes extremely demotivated as she feels that the other's dress was very superior than her in the party. And this becomes the root cause for her low self esteem. And it also leads to alienation. And she even thinks about in the point of view of others because of insecurity. She even compares herself with the fly in terms of beauty and class. She thinks that the other women in the party are beautiful as a butterfly, and while she is a drowsy, decrepit, horribly dingy old fly. And here too, Maple could have compared herself with some other insects. There are many insects, but she deliberately chooses the fly so as to reveal her haplessness and the feeling of being puny when compared to the others, which is the high class society people. And in the case of Maple, she feels distrusted in the compliments made by others. Even though the others in the party, they give an optimistic compliment over her dress, she still thinks that they are mocking at her, and they are not giving a correct compliment for her dress. And the class difference is also highly presented among the high class society. And here too, the people from high class society have a certain standard in their ways, means, behaviors, habits, contacts, and wavelength of mind. And Maple compares her dress to others only because of the class difference. She compares her dress with Rose Shah. She is a high class woman. And here too, the identity is brought out. The loss of identity is brought out because identity is the birthright of each and every individual, and each and every person around the world, they have a unique identity, and which could not be penetrated by any external forces. And here Maple tries to become a person which she is not in reality. She covers herself with a mask so that her original status is not revealed to others. She spends money for the dress which she could not afford, and she could not even face herself only because of the loss of identity. So, what is the solution for this? So, it can be only achieved through self liberation. And self liberation can be attained from self realization and self analysis. So people usually they connect self liberation only to death, but it is not so. There are many other ways to achieve self liberation. It can be achieved by achieved only when an individual is being himself and not trying to imitate others. And if an individual covers himself or herself with a mask, he or she cannot be liberated. And the self liberation, it needs boldness and not cowardice. It needs a strong individual and not a weakling. So, self liberation is like a small light which leads to happiness and peace in a dark tunnel. So, at one point of time, even Maple she realizes that it is a waste of time to worry about these useless things, and she decides to politely leave the party. And when Mrs. Dalloway, she just stops Maple, she sarcastically rejects the idea of Mrs. Dalloway by saying that she was very happy in the party. And here too, the cultural impact it's reflected on women more than men because the women's psyche it's naturally it makes women to bring become bound to these unwanted sufferings. In the aim of meeting the cultural standard, women they tend to lose their true happiness. They forget to enjoy the meaning of being content, and they also lose themselves in the wilderness where they lose their identity and mental peace. They even live in the world of illusion where nothing remains permanent. When reality hits them hard, they find it very hard to accept that inevitable life. So in order to overcome these illusions, a woman should be ready to accept her true self. She should have the feeling of satisfaction and she should not earn for something that is beyond her reach. So thus culture has various dimensions which results in wholesome impacts on women. Thank you for listening so patiently to my presentation, and thank you everyone.
Thank you, Bisma. That
Thank you,
is a
ma'am.
beautiful presentation. We have brought out the how women suffer culturally, how the psychologically and everything. That was really a good analysis on your topic. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So we have the last presenter, Shalini from Pondicherry University. She's going to present on the title Life, Literature and Landscapes, a view on Sangam people and Sangam poetry.
Yes, ma'am.
So
I will share
Shalini,
my
this session
screen.
is open
Yes,
to
ma'am.
you.
Yes, ma'am. I think my screen is visible, ma'am.
Yes, your
Hello.
screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Hello, everyone. My paper is titled as Life, Literature and Landscape, Spatializing Tamil Sangam Age and Tamil Sangam Culture. Objectives of my paper are to facilitate an understanding of region acting as cultural space, to spatialize Tamil Sangam age through Tamil Sangam culture, that to Agam poetry respectively and exclusively, to recognize the rhizomatic link between life, literature, and landscape, to illustrate the space, place, social relationship. Life, literature, and landscape share interlinked relationship incidentally and evidently. It is interesting to note how literature and landscape tell the stories of people, their tradition, their history, and on. Literature and landscape have a conspicuous link. From British Lake School through Australian bush poetry to Canadian Pali literature, the relationship between region and literature is apparent. So does in Tamil Sangam literature. To avoid the language barrier, the English translation of Sangam poetry by A.K. Ramanujam is used. Landscape serves as a cultural space inherently. Literature becomes a medium to document the same. At the outset, it is important to understand what space is. Cultural space, as I understand, is a space, community, which has its own culture. A simplified definition of space is that it's an abstraction rather than being exclusively physical. Professor Lisa Das notes space is physical, political, metaphoric, identity, and sentimental. For some, space is social construction. For others, a space informed lifestyle. Nayak claims where you live determine how you live. Tamil is one of the richest and finest classical languages of India. Tamil literature, its culture, its lore, its chronicle of history run parallel to each other. Not to know them is not to know a unique and incredible Indian civilization which has survived for millennia. C.V. Damadara Pillai notes such extinction, quote unquote, only what has escaped fire and wars and religious taboo remains. The third element, water, has its share. When you untie a knot, a palm leaf cracks. When you turn a leaf, it breaks in half. Old manuscripts are crumbling, and there is no one to make a new copies. Sangam literature is divided into two, Akam and Puram, where former talks about inferior life of Vedan Tamilians, such as human aspect of love and relationship. The later, that is Puram literature, talks about exterior life, that is human aspect of heroism, bravery, values, ethics, etc. Agam poetry has one-to-one correspondence with the landscape. The word Thinai stands for landscape. Thinai theory is associated with place-based poetry of Sangam literature and as cultural tool and has been a cultural tool in understanding social, cultural, economic life of the then early Tamil people. The Tolkappiyam in ancient Sangam texts mention five Thinais, namely Kurunji, Mullai, Marudam, Neidal, Palai. As said earlier, this paper's aim is to find the rhizomatic link between space and place, that is to spatialize Sangamscape. Interestingly, the working definition of cultural space and characteristic of Sangam landscape coincides. That is, cultural space is defined by cultural practices, languages spoken, and rituals performed. Characteristic of Sangam landscape is defined by cultural practices, religion followed, and on. The instance of place, space, social relationship continues throughout the Tamil Sangam poetry. Allow me to introduce the characteristic of five Sangam landscape, which may act as a cultural space of ancient Tamil Nadu. From telling about the deity they worship through the food they eat to the occupation they did, this table seemingly display the space of the then Tamilians in correspondence with place. Here one could see how place create the space. For example, Kurunji landscape is a mountainous region, so obviously there will be a huge blooming of flowers which eventually would attract bees. The Kurunji tribal occupation thus becomes honey gathering. Sangam mountainous poetry document the same innately. Mullai landscape. Mullai is a pastoral region, so people out there did pastoral occupation. Yet again another instance of place creating the space. There are a number of instances throughout Sangam poetry to prove the hypothesis of the paper. In accordance, Marudam is an agriculture region. Being farmers, people out there know the value of rain. Thus, the god of rain, Indra, became the presiding deity. Neither landscape, and allow me to read a Sangam coastal poem to give a bird eye view of space one-to-one relationship. Friends, fishies well roar, but the fishermen ply their wooden boat, afraid of the cold lash of the waves, looking my bangle slips as he leaves, grow tight as he returns. The above poem is ascribed to Ammana. The poem gives us a description of Nathan landscape and its space. The hero is written after earning wealth for the future. The heroine is very happy. She utters the following words as though she is accusing a bangle. The poem tells us what Nathan region really is. The words such as conch shells, she swells, fisherman ply, and gives a geographical description of Nathan. The possible interpretation is that when Talaivan, hero goes to the sea, the Talavi, heroine would be in a desperate state. When he comes back with the wealth by fishing, the state would be a merry one. Thus, the poem tells about people who live their fishermen and sustained by it. So far, Akkam poetry are used to highlight the link between region and its space. Accordingly, Puram poetry Puram poetry of ancient Tamil literature deal with exterior life unlike Agam poetry. In Agam poetry, there is no one-to-one correspondence between region and literature. Nevertheless, these poems do serve the purpose of telling us the life of ancient Tamilian. Sangam landscape and Sangam literature act as a cultural space. From naming the place to the environment through place constructing the social to social forming the space. The rhizomatic link is explicit. Therefore, region do act as a cultural space. Furthermore, Sangam poetry archives the ancient Tamil civilization from love to loot, without which Tamil would not have one place alongside the world literature. Yadum Ure, Yavarum Kelir. To us, all terms are our own, everyone is our kin. So articulate one of the Sangam poems. Tamil literature is non-confined to regional boundaries or linguistical boundaries. Therefore, it is suffice to say, Sangam literature adds culture and pride to our nation. Thank you. These are the reference I use and I acknowledge the source I used.
Shalini, that was a good presentation.
Thank you,
You have
ma'am.
taken a different topic
Yes, ma'am.
for culture. Everyone was speaking about the modern culture and the impact of multiculturalism and everything. But you have taken a very old culture, Sangam age, and you have revived the old culture within the hearts of the listeners. That was
Thank you,
really
ma'am.
good. Your choice of choosing the work, that is really good, and I appreciate it. And
Thank
thank
you,
you for
ma'am.
your presentation. So as all the 5 presenters are presented, I close the session. Thank you.